The Cry in the Ash Woods. The Ash Woods were not a place one entered by accident. Travelers spoke of them in hushed voices, as though even the memory of the forest might be listening. Roads bent away from it, maps faded near its borders, and those who claimed to have passed through it rarely told the same story twice. Some said the trees whispered. Others insisted the ground itself remembered fire. A few, those whose eyes lingered too long in shadow, simply said that the forest was not empty. It watched. From a distance, the ash woods appeared as a smudge of darkness upon the horizon, a jagged wound cutting through the softer greens of the surrounding lands. Up close, however, it felt like something else entirely, something older, something that had burned and yet refused to die. The trees were blackened, their bark cracked and charred as though scorched by flames that had long since vanished. Yet they still stood tall and stubborn, their branches twisted skyward like skeletal hands grasping for something just out of reach. No leaves grew upon them, only thin strands of gray moss that swayed gently, whispering against one another whenever the wind stirred. And there was always wind. Not a gentle breeze, but a restless, uneasy current that moved through the forest without rhythm. It carried with it the faint scent of ash, dry, bitter, and ancient. It slid between the trees, curled around trunks, and slipped across the forest floor, as if searching for something it had lost. The ground beneath was a soft layer of soot and powder, muffling footsteps and swallowing sound. Even the smallest movement seemed distant here, as though the forest absorbed it before it could truly exist. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. No animals stirred. It was not silence. It was absence. And yet, despite all of this, despite the warnings, the stillness, the feeling that the forest itself might be holding its breath, someone walked within its depths. Elrich Thornville did not hesitate as he stepped beneath the blackened canopy. He had arrived at the edge of the ash woods just as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, staining the sky in shades of fatting gold and deepening crimson. Most travelers would have turned back then, choosing the safety of open roads and visible horizons. Elrich did not. He adjusted the strap of his satchel across his shoulder, glancing briefly at the path ahead, if it could be called a path at all. The ground offered no clear direction, only a scattering of faint impressions where others might have passed long ago. Or perhaps something else had. It did not matter to him. He stepped forward, and the moment he crossed into the forest, the air changed. It grew cooler, heavier. The last light of the sun seemed to falter, dimmed by the dark trunks and tangled branches above. Shadows stretched long and uncertain, blending together until it became difficult to tell where one ended and another began. Elrich paused only for a moment. He drew a slow breath, the taste of ash settling faintly on his tongue, and then continued on. There was no fear in his movements. Not because he was unaware of the danger, but because fear to Elrich was a familiar companion, one he had long since learned to walk beside rather than run from. He was not a warrior. There was no sword at his side, no armor to guard his chest. His hands bore no calluses from battle, no scars from blades or claws. He was not a mage. No arcane symbols adorned his skin, no hidden power hummed beneath his breath. He could not call fire from the air or bend the wind to his will. He was, by all appearances, entirely ordinary. His clothes were simple, worn but well cared for. His boots were sturdy, though dusted with the gray powder of the forest floor. A dark cloak hung loosely from his shoulders, its edges frayed from travel. But it was his satchel that mattered. It rested against his hip, its leather softened with age and use. Inside it lay a collection of tools, small, precise, and carefully maintained. Screwdrivers of varying sizes, delicate pliers, fine brushes, coils of wire, spare gears, springs, and tiny polished components that caught what little light filtered through the trees. To most, they were nothing. To Elrich, they were everything. Because Elrich Thornville was a tinkerer. He fixed things. Not grand machines of war or towering constructs of magic, but small things, forgotten things. The kind of objects people discarded when they broke, when they stopped working, when they no longer held value. Music boxes with silent melodies. Lanterns with shattered glass. Pocket watches that had long since lost their time. Toys, especially toys. He had always found something deeply unsettling about broken toys. Perhaps it was the way they seemed to remember laughter. Or perhaps it was the way they were so easily abandoned, as though the joy they once carried had never mattered at all. Elrich did not abandon things. If something could be repaired, he would try. And if it could not, he would still try. It was a quiet kind of purpose, one that did not earn glory or recognition, one that most would overlook entirely. But it was his, and it was enough. The forest stretched endlessly around him as he walked, each step sinking slightly into the ash-soft ground. Time felt strange here, uncertain, stretched thin like a thread pulled too tight. It might have been minutes. It might have been hours. Elrich did not count. He moved steadily, his eyes scanning his surroundings not for danger but for detail. The angle of a branch, the pattern of cracks in the bark, the subtle shifts in the wind. He listened, not for threats, but for anything that felt out of place. That was why he heard it. At first, it was so faint he almost mistook it for the wind. A thin, trembling sound that wove itself between the whispers of the forest. It rose and fell unevenly, like something struggling to be heard. Elrich slowed. He tilted his head slightly, his steps growing quieter as he listened more closely. There it was again. A cry, soft, fragile, and unmistakably real. He frowned. It was not the sharp, desperate call of a wounded animal, nor was it the distant echo of something hunting or warning. It was different. There was sorrow in it. Not the kind that came from pain alone, but something deeper. Something that lingered, that trembled at the edges of the sound like a held breath. And beneath it, something else. Something powerful. Elrich stood still, his gaze shifting through the trees. The cry came again. Closer now. Or perhaps he was simply listening more carefully. He hesitated. Only for a moment. The ashwoods were not kind to those who wandered without caution. Every story he had heard, every warning, every whispered tale, pressed faintly at the edges of his thoughts. Turn back. Leave it. Some things were better left alone. Elrich exhaled softly. Then he turned toward the sound. Carefully he stepped between the trees, his movements slow and deliberate. The ash beneath his boots shifted quietly, offering little resistance as he moved. The cry guided him. It wavered, faltered, then rose again, each time pulling him further from whatever path he might have once followed. The forest seemed to close in as he went deeper. The trees grew closer together, their twisted branches forming a tangled canopy overhead. The light dimmed further, shadows thickening until they clung to the edges of his vision. Still, he continued. The cry grew clearer, stronger, and then he saw it. A small clearing opened before him, the ground slightly less choked by ash. The trees pulled back just enough to allow a pale shaft of light to slip through, illuminating the center of the space. And there, curled in on itself, was the source of the sound. Elrich stopped. For a moment, he did not move. Did not breathe. A baby dragon's. It lay huddled against the ground, its body trembling with quiet sobs. Its wings, small, fragile, and dusted with ash, were folded tightly around it, as though it were trying to make itself disappear. Its scales shimmered faintly beneath the gray coating, glowing like embers buried beneath cold ash. Each small movement sent a subtle ripple of light across its body, warm and alive despite the stillness of the forest. It was small, no larger than a dog. Too small, too young. Elrich's mind raced. Dragons were not creatures one simply found. They were rare, so rare that most people would go their entire lives without seeing one. Powerful beyond measure, ancient beyond understanding, and fiercely protective of their own. A dragon hatchling would never be alone. It should not be alone. Which meant, somewhere nearby. Elrich swallowed. His gaze flickered briefly to the surrounding trees, the shadows stretching long and silent between them. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. Only the wind. And the soft, broken cries of the creature before him. The dragon shifted slightly, its claws tightening around something it held close to its chest. It was clutching something, protecting it, even as it cried. Elric's attention returned to the small, trembling form. It was crying. Not roaring, not lashing out, not showing any sign of the fearsome power dragons were known for. Just crying. Softly, quietly, like a child. Something in his chest tightened. He took a step forward. The ash shifted beneath his boot. The sound, though faint, was enough. The baby dragon froze. Its crying stopped abruptly. For a heartbeat, the clearing fell completely silent. Then slowly, cautiously, The dragon lifted its head. Its eyes met his. They were gold, bright, luminous, filled with a depth that felt far older than the creature's small size suggested. And they were wet with tears. Elrich did not move. He expected a reaction, fear perhaps, or anger, even instinctive aggression. Dragons were not gentle creatures, even the young ones. But the dragon did not lash out. It did not bare its teeth or spread its wings. It simply looked at him. There was fear there. Yes, but also something else. Uncertainty. Hope. Elric felt his breath catch. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to one knee. "It's all right," he said, his voice soft, steady. He did not know if the creature would understand him. But tone, at least, was universal. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dragon blinked. A small, uncertain sound escaped it, a soft, trembling chirp. It shifted slightly, its wings loosening just enough to reveal what it held in its claws. Elric leaned forward just a fraction, and saw it clearly. A toy. Small, delicate, broken. It was a mechanical bird, crafted from thin metal and painted in what had once been bright, cheerful colors. Its wings were bent, one twisted at an unnatural angle. The paint was chipped, scratched away in places to reveal dull metal beneath. One side of its body hung slightly open, exposing the intricate gears within. Or rather, what remained of them? A piece was missing. The mechanism was incomplete. Elric's eyes softened. The dragon held the toy carefully, as though it were something precious. Its claws, sharp though they were, did not damage it further. Instead, they cradled it with surprising gentleness. The creature sniffled. Then, hesitantly, it extended its claws toward him. The motion was slow, uncertain, as though it expected him to refuse. Or worse, Elric blinked. "You want me to fix it?" The dragon made a small sound, soft, hopeful. It did not pull back. It did not hesitate. It simply waited, trusting him. Elric stared at the toy for a moment, then at the dragons, then back again. Of all the things he had expected to find in the ashwoods, this was not one of them. He let out a quiet breath. A faint, almost disbelieving smile touched his lips. "All right," he said gently. Slowly, carefully, he reached out. The dragon flinched, just slightly, but it did not pull away. Elric paused, allowing the creature time to adjust. His movements remained steady, deliberate, never sudden, never threatening. After a moment, the dragon relaxed. Its grip loosened, and with a small, trembling motion, it placed the broken toy into his hands. The metal was cool against his skin. Light, fragile. Elric held it carefully, turning it just enough to examine the damage. A missing gear, bent wings, a misaligned mechanism. Nothing he had not seen before. Nothing he could not fix. He glanced up. The dragon watched him intently, its golden eyes wide with a fragile, desperate hope. As though everything depended on this moment. Elric's grip tightened slightly, not in tension but in resolve. He nodded more to himself than to the creature. "I'll see what I can do." The words were simple, quiet, but they carried a promise. And the dragon, small and trembling beneath the ash-dark sky, believed him. The gift of trust. Elric sat upon a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, the broken toy resting carefully in his hands. For a moment, he did nothing. He simply observed. The mechanical bird was delicate, far more so than most objects he worked on. Its frame was thin, crafted from finely shaped metal that had been carefully molded to resemble feathers. Though time and wear had dulled its surface, faint traces of color still lingered along its wings, soft blues, warm golds, and hints of crimson that caught the dim light filtering through the ash-choked canopy. It had once been beautiful. Perhaps it still was. Even broken, there was something about it that suggested care, intention. It had not been made hastily or cheaply. Whoever crafted it had done so with patience, with skill, perhaps even with affection. Elric turned it slightly, examining the damage. The right wing was bent inward, its thin metal feathers twisted out of alignment. One of the internal gears was missing entirely, leaving a hollow gap within the mechanism. The casing along its side had loosened, the seam slightly split where it should have been sealed. He ran his thumb lightly along the edge, feeling the faint irregularities. Old, worn, but not beyond saving. A quiet breath left him. It's old, Elrich murmured more to himself than to the creature watching him, but not beyond saving. The words hung softly in the air. The baby dragon shifted closer. It had not moved far from him since placing the toy in his hands. In fact, it seemed reluctant to move at all, as though any distance between them might somehow break whatever fragile connection had formed. Its small body trembled faintly, not with fear alone but with anticipation. Its golden eyes remained fixed on the toy. On his hands, every movement he made seemed to draw its attention, as though it feared missing even the smallest detail. When he adjusted his grip, it leaned forward slightly. When he tilted the toy, its head tilted with it. And every so often, a soft, uneven sniffle escaped it, a reminder that its earlier distress had not entirely faded. Elrich noticed. He was accustomed to working under observation. Children often hovered when he repaired their toys, their expressions shifting between hope and anxiety with every adjustment he made. This felt similar, and yet not. There was something deeper in the dragon's gaze, something more fragile. This was not merely a broken object. This mattered. Elrich shifted slightly on the log, setting his satchel beside him. The familiar weight of it was comforting, a steady presence in an unfamiliar place. He opened it carefully. Inside, his tools lay neatly arranged, each one secured in its place. They were not ornate nor particularly impressive to look at, but they were well-made, well-kept, and most importantly trusted. He selected them one by one. A small screwdriver, its handle worn smooth from years of use. A pair of fine-tipped pliers. A narrow brush. A tiny cloth folded carefully. And a small pouch containing spare parts, gears, springs, screws, each sorted and polished, collected over countless repairs. As he laid them out beside him, the dragon crept closer. Its claws pressed softly into the ash-covered ground, leaving faint impressions that were quickly blurred by the restless wind. Its wings shifted, half unfolding as it leaned forward, curiosity beginning to mingle with its earlier sorrow. It let out a quiet chirp. Elrich glanced at it briefly. "You'll have to give me a little time," he said gently. "It's not a simple fix." The dragon blinked. Then, as though understanding, if not the words, then the tone, it settled beside him. Close. Very close. Close enough that Elrich could feel the faint warmth radiating from its body. He returned his attention to the toy. Carefully, he positioned it in his palm and began. The first step was always the same. Assessment. He located the small seam along the bird's side where the casing could be opened. The latch was delicate, slightly bent but not broken. Good. He inserted the tip of the screwdriver and applied gentle pressure. A soft click. The casing loosened. The dragon stiffened. A faint whimper escaped it. Elrich paused immediately. He did not look up, but he spoke. "I have to open it," he said quietly. "I won't break it." There was a moment of silence. Then slowly the tension eased. Elrich continued. He opened the casing just enough to expose the inner workings. The mechanism within was intricate, a network of tiny gears and springs, each carefully placed to transfer motion from one part to another. Even in its damaged state, the craftsmanship was evident. But the missing gear was obvious. Without it, the system could not function. Elrich reached for his pouch. The dragon leaned closer. Its nose twitched as it watched him sift through the tiny components, each one glinting faintly in the dim light. He selected a gear. Then another. He held them up, comparing size, thickness, alignment. The dragon's head tilted slightly. Curiosity had begun to replace its earlier fear. Elrich allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. He returned the unsuitable pieces and selected one that seemed to match. Carefully, he positioned it within the mechanism. The dragon let out a soft, questioning chirp. "Not yet," Elrich murmured. "Let me see." He adjusted it slightly, aligning it with the surrounding gears. The teeth meshed imperfectly at first, catching against one another. Too large. He removed it. The dragon made a small, worried sound. Elrich reached for another. This one was smaller. He tried again. Better. The gears aligned more smoothly, though still not perfectly. He made a slight adjustment, tilting it just enough to correct the angle. This time the teeth slid into place with a soft, satisfying precision. Elrich exhaled quietly. That should do. The dragon leaned closer, its eyes wide. It made a soft, hopeful sound. But Elrich was not finished. Not yet. He secured the gear in place, tightening it with careful precision. Then he turned his attention to the wing. The right wing was badly bent. He examined it closely, noting where the metal had warped. Straightening it would be delicate work, too much pressure and it could snap. Too little and it would remain misaligned. He reached for the pliers. The dragon stiffened again. It watched the tool with clear unease. Elric paused. He shifted the pliers slightly, allowing the dragon to see how he held them, not as a weapon, but as an extension of his work. Slowly, deliberately, he applied pressure to the bent section. The metal resisted at first. Then, gradually, it yielded. A faint creak echoed as the wing straightened. The dragon whimpered. Elric stopped immediately. He held the toy steady, allowing the tension to ease. "It's all right," he said softly. "It's supposed to do that." The dragon's eyes flickered between the wing and his face. After a moment, it relaxed. Elric continued, his movements even more careful now. Little by little, he corrected the shape of the wing, restoring its original form as best he could. When he was finished, he tested the joint gently. It moved. Not perfectly, but enough. Better, he murmured. The dragon made a small, tentative chirp. Encouraged. Elric reached for the brush. Dust and ash had settled within the mechanism, clogging the delicate components. He cleaned it carefully, sweeping away the fine particles with slow, precise strokes. The dragon watched intently. Its earlier distress had faded into quiet focus. Occasionally, it would lean closer, its nose nearly brushing his hands, only to pull back at the last moment. As though unsure if it was allowed. Elric did not push it away. He did not acknowledge the closeness. He simply continued his work. Time passed. Quietly, unnoticed. The ashwoods, so often restless, seemed to grow still around them. The wind softened, its whispers fading into a gentle hush. Even the ever-present sense of unease seemed to recede, as though the forest itself were watching, waiting. But Elric noticed none of it. His world had narrowed to the small, intricate mechanism before him. And the creature beside him. When he polished the surface of the toy, restoring a faint glimmer to its worn metal, the dragon let out a soft, hopeful chirp. When he adjusted the final alignment of the gears, it leaned closer still. And when he closed the casing with a gentle click, sealing the mechanism once more. The dragon held its breath. Elric sat back slightly. The toy rested in his palm, still and silent. For a moment, he did nothing. He simply looked at it. There was always a moment like this. A pause. A breath held between what was and what might be. He reached for the small key at the base of the bird. "Let's see," he murmured. He began to wind it. The mechanism resisted at first, the tension building slowly as the spring tightened. Each turn was careful, measured, too much force and the delicate components could fail. The dragon leaned forward. Its entire body seemed to still. The final turn clicked into place. Elric released the key. For a heartbeat. Nothing happened. The silence stretched. Heavy. Uncertain. The dragon's eyes widened. A soft, fearful sound escaped it. Elric frowned slightly. Had he misaligned the gear? Had he? Then, a faint whir. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible. But it was there. The gears began to move. Slowly at first. Then smoothly. The bird's wings twitched. Once. Twice. Then. They fluttered. The motion was gentle, rhythmic, as the mechanism found its balance. The wings lifted and fell, the metal feathers catching the dim light as they moved. And then, a sound. A soft melodic chirp. Clear. Bright. Alive. The bird turned in a small circle, its movement steady and precise, the hum of its mechanism smooth and even. It worked. The dragon froze, completely still. Its golden eyes locked onto the toy, wide with disbelief. For a moment, it did not move, did not breathe. Then, it let out a sharp, joyful cry. The sound burst from it, bright and unrestrained, echoing through the clearing like a spark of light in the dim forest. It leapt forward, clumsy, uncoordinated. Its wings flapped wildly, stirring ash into the air as it bounded toward the toy. Elrich barely had time to steady it before the dragon pressed against him, its attention darting rapidly between the bird and his face. It chirped excitedly, a stream of sounds tumbling from it in rapid succession. It nudged the toy, then Elrich's hand, then the toy again. Its entire body vibrated with energy, its earlier sorrow completely forgotten. Elrich laughed. The sound was soft but genuine. "Careful now," he said. The dragon did not seem to understand the words, but it understood the tone. It slowed just slightly. Enough. It reached out with its claws gently, so very gently, and took the toy. This time it did not clutch it in fear. It held it with pride, with joy. The bird continued to move, its wings fluttering as it chirped softly. The dragon watched it transfixed. Then slowly it pressed its forehead against Elric's hand. The gesture was simple, instinctive, and filled with something unmistakable. Gratitude. Elrich stilled. For a moment he did not move. Then carefully he let his hand rest where it was, allowing the contact. The dragon's warmth seeped into his skin, steady and comforting. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. The forest held its breath. And for a moment, everything felt peaceful. But peace in the ashwoods was never as simple as it seemed. Beyond the clearing, where the trees grew thicker and the shadows deeper, something shifted. High above, where the blackened branches reached toward the dim sky, a shape stirred. Massive, silent, watching. A pair of eyes opened in the darkness. Ancient, unblinking, fixed upon the clearing below. Upon the small dragon. And the man beside it. Elrich did not notice. He did not see the subtle movement of shadow against shadow. Did not hear the faint rustle of something far larger than the forest itself. He did not feel the weight of the gaze that had settled upon him. A gaze that had watched empires rise and fall. That had seen centuries pass like fleeting moments. A gaze that now lingered. Evaluating, judging, remembering. Elrich simply sat upon the fallen log, a faint smile on his face, as the small dragon beside him chirped happily over its restored treasure. Unawares. Entirely unawares. That royal eyes were watching. The eyes of royal fire. The ground trembled. At first it was subtle, so faint that it might have been mistaken for imagination. A slight vibration beneath the ash-covered earth, a barely perceptible shift that whispered through the clearing like the echo of something distant. But then it came again. Stronger, heavier. The fallen log beneath Elrich creaked softly, its ancient wood protesting under the unseen force. The ash upon the ground stirred, lifting in thin, restless spirals that curled around his boots. Elrich's smile faded. The warmth of the moment of laughter, of quiet triumph, fractured in an instant, replaced by something far colder. Instinct. Not fear. Not yet. But awareness. He stilled. Beside him, the baby dragon froze. Its joyful chirps cut off abruptly, the bright, playful energy that had filled the clearing vanishing as though it had never been. Its body went rigid, its small claws tightening around the mechanical bird it held so carefully. The change was immediate. Profound. Where there had been excitement, there was now silence. Not the uneasy quiet of the ashwoods. Something deeper. Something reverent. The dragon lowered its head slightly. Not in fear, but in recognition. Elrich felt it then. The shift in the air. The weight of something vast and unseen pressing down upon the clearing. A shadow fell across the ground. Slowly, steadily, it stretched, spilling over the ash, climbing the trunks of the blackened trees, swallowing the faint light that filtered through the broken canopy. Elric's breath caught. He turned, slowly, carefully, and looked up. For a moment, his mind refused to understand what he was seeing. The sky above the ashwoods had always been dim, veiled by drifting ash and the tangled reach of dead branches. But now something moved within that darkness, a shape so vast it seemed to reshape the sky itself. It descended without sound. No beating of wings. No roar of wind. Only presence. And then, light, not bright, not blinding, but deep, molten, gold. It traced along the edges of something immense, catching against scales that gleamed like liquid fire beneath the dim sky. Each movement revealed another fragment, another piece of a creature that did not belong to the world of ordinary things. Elrich's heart began to pound. Slow at first, then faster still. The creature descended fully into view, and the world seemed to shrink around it. A dragon, but not like the small, trembling creature beside him. This one was vast. Its body stretched far beyond the clearing, its presence filling the space between the trees as though the forest itself were too small to contain it. Its wings unfolded with a slow, deliberate grace, each membrane catching what little light remained and bending it into shimmering gold. Its scales were not merely reflective. They burned, not with flame but with something deeper, something older. Each scale held a glow within it, as though it carried the memory of fire rather than the fire itself. Its head lowered and Elrich saw its eyes. Ancient. That was the only word that came to him. Ancient beyond time. They were not simply gold. They were layered with it depth upon depth, like molten metal cooled and reshaped 1,000 times over. Within them was intelligence, vast and unyielding. Within them was memory. Centuries. Millennia. Power. Not the kind that needed to be proven. The kind that simply was. Elric's breath hitched. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. He stepped back. Just one step. But it was enough. The ash shifted beneath his boot, the sound faint, but in the silence of the clearing it felt deafening. The great dragon's gaze shifted. Slowly, deliberately, and settled on him. Elrich felt it like a weight. Not upon his body, but within him. As though those eyes were not merely looking at him, but through him, past the surface, past the simple truth of what he was, into something deeper. He swallowed. His throat felt dry. He had no weapons, no defense, no understanding of what might come next. Only the certainty that he stood in the presence of something far beyond him. Something that could end him without effort. Beside him, the baby dragon moved. Elric's gaze flickered. The small creature, which had been so still only moments before, suddenly sprang into motion. But not in fear, not in flight. It ran forward. Its small claws kicked up ash as it bounded across the clearing, its wings flaring slightly for balance. It moved without hesitation, without uncertainty, its earlier reverence now transformed into something bright and eager. It chirped, a soft, happy sound, as though greeting something familiar. As though greeting family. Elrich blinked. The realization struck him all at once. This was no wandering beast. No solitary creature passing through the forest. This was... The baby dragon reached the massive creature and stopped, just before one of its enormous forelegs. It lifted its head, chirping again, louder this time, the sound filled with unmistakable excitement. And then, it raised the toy. The small mechanical bird, now whole and moving, its wings fluttering softly as it let out its delicate, melodic chirp. The gesture was simple, innocent, proud, as though it were saying, "Look." The great dragon lowered its head. The motion was slow, controlled, the sheer size of it enough to stir the air around the clearing. Ash lifted in soft waves, drifting upward as the massive form descended. Its eyes focused on the small dragon. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to that single point. The baby dragon chirped again, shifting from one foot to the other, clearly eager, excited. It nudged the toy forward. The bird chirped in response. The great dragon watched. Silent, still. Then its gaze shifted. From the small dragon to the toy. The movement was subtle, but deliberate. Elrich felt his breath catch again. The great dragon's eyes lingered on the mechanical bird, on the repaired wings, on the smooth, steady motion of its mechanism, on the way it worked. Whole, complete. Its gaze moved again, slowly, unavoidably, and settled on Elrich. The world seemed to still. Even the wind faded, its restless whisper falling silent in the presence of something far greater. Elrich stood where he was. He did not step back again. He did not run. Though every instinct within him urged caution, urged distance, urged escape, he remained. Because there was nowhere to run. And because something within him refused. The dragon's gaze held him, pinned him, not with force but with awareness. It was not looking at him as one might look at prey, nor as one might look at an enemy. It was considering him. Elrich felt it then. The weight of judgment. Not immediate, not emotional, measured, careful, as though the creature before him was not reacting but deciding. Evaluating. Elrich swallowed. His hands felt suddenly very empty, very small. He began, his voice quieter than he expected. He cleared his throat. Tried again. I only fixed what was broken. The words sounded insignificant the moment they left him. Small, inadequate, but they were true. He had no grand explanation, no justification beyond that. The dragon did not respond. It did not move. The silence stretched. Long, heavy. Elric's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. He did not look away. Could not. The dragon's gaze held him, unyielding, unwavering. Seconds passed, or perhaps longer. Time had lost its meaning. And then, the great dragon exhaled. The sound was deep, resonant, not a roar, not a threat, a breath. It rolled through the clearing like distant thunder, warm air sweeping across the ground, stirring the ash into soft, swirling patterns. Elrich flinched. Instinct. He expected heat, flame, destruction, but none came. The air was warm, gentle. It brushed against his skin, carrying with it a faint, comforting heat, like the last remnants of a dying fire on a cold night. He blinked, surprised. The dragon's gaze remained on him. But something had changed. The weight of it had shifted. Subtly, the baby dragon chirped again, breaking the silence. It climbed onto the great dragon's foreleg, its small claws gripping carefully against the smooth, gleaming scales. It moved with familiarity, with ease, as though it had done so countless times before. It settled there, holding the toy close. The mechanical bird continued its soft, steady movement, its gentle chirping filling the quiet. The contrast was striking. Small and large, fragile and immense, innocent and ancient. The great dragon lowered its head once more. Closer now. Its gaze did not leave Elrich. And then, it moved. Slowly, deliberately. It inclined its head. Just slightly. The motion was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Elrich's breath caught. He understood. Not fully, not completely, but enough. It was not submission, not weaknesses. It was acknowledgement, recognition, approval. The realization struck him with a quiet, overwhelming force. He had expected anger, punishment, at best indifference. But not this. Never this. The dragon held his gaze for a moment longer. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not words, not thoughts, something deeper. An understanding. Faint, incomplete, but real. Then slowly the great dragon began to rise. Its wings unfolded fully, stretching outward with a quiet, immense power. The movement displaced the air, sending waves of wind across the clearing. Ash lifted in great, swirling clouds, the ground beneath trembling once more. Elrich stepped back, shielding his eyes. The baby dragon held its place, secure against the larger creature, the toy still clutched carefully in its claws. It chirped softly, happily. The great dragon's gaze lingered on Elrich one last time. And in those ancient eyes something remained. Not judgment, not curiosity, something else. Recognition, as though it had marked him. Not as prey, not as threat, but as something remembered. Then, with a powerful sweep of its wings, the great dragon lifted into the air. The force of it rippled outward, bending the trees, scattering ash into the sky in a great spiraling cloud. The clearing was engulfed in motion, the world reduced to wind and shadow and the fading glow of gold. Elrich watched, helpless, awestruck. The massive form rose higher, its silhouette merging with the dim sky, the molten gleam of its scales fading as it ascended beyond the reach of light. The baby dragon's small form remained visible for only a moment longer, its wings fluttering, its head turned slightly as though looking back. Then it too vanished. Gone. The sky returned to its muted gray. The wind settled. The ash drifted slowly back to the ground. And the ash woods fell silent once more. Elrich stood alone in the clearing. For a long moment he did not move. Did not speak. The world felt different. Quieter, as though something had passed through it, leaving behind an absence that could not be filled. The fallen log remained where he had sat. His tools lay scattered beside it, untouched. The faint impressions of small claws marked the ash where the baby dragon had stood. And above, nothing, only the empty sky. Elrich exhaled slowly. His hands trembled slightly. He looked down at them, at the fingers that had repaired a broken toy, at the same hands that had just been acknowledged by something ancient. "I just fixed a toy," he murmured. The words felt unreal, insufficient, and yet entirely true. He had done nothing extraordinary, nothing heroic, nothing that should have drawn the attention of something like that. And yet, it had. Somewhere beyond the clouds, beyond the reach of sight, something vast and ancient carried the memory of him. A fleeting moment, a small act, but remembered. Elrich closed his hands slowly. The faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. Then he gathered his tools, slipped them back into his satchel, and turned away from the clearings. The ashwoods remained as they had always been, dark, silent, and filled with secrets. But now, he carried one of them with him. And somewhere in the unseen skies, a royal dragon remembered his name. And in a world where dragons ruled the hidden spaces between earth and sky, that was no small thing.